All right, it's Friday. That means we are back with another episode of Punk Rock Politics, the podcast. Brendan Reagan is out getting a single wisdom tooth removed today. He only got one of them. So I'm Mitch Maley, joined in the studio by Rob Garcia, making it up from Venice. Rob is a touring musician with the band Jukebox Assassins, but he's also an astute political mind, and I've wanted to have him come up and sub anytime we've had an opening. Rob, thanks for making the big trip up here to join us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a sincere pleasure.
All right, let's jump right into it. News, Trump the Snowbird. CNN reporting that after establishing Mar-a-Lago, his lavish Palm Beach, Florida resort, as his post-White House home and office for the last 4 months, former President Donald Trump a week ago moved his base operation to his members-only Bedminster, New Jersey golf club. So good riddance, Mr. Trump. You will not be a Floridian for the summer. And when you come back, I guess it'll just be annoying us like the rest of them, right? Adding a big motorcade to the already bad Snowbird traffic problems.
Well, now he's also, according to a couple of days ago, now he's also fair game, right? We were gonna hide him for a little while. Right. But now he's in Bedminster, so...
And now there is the Southern District of New York is reporting that they are turning their investigation, which had been civil, into a criminal one, into his activities. And that may be the ultimate downfall for him.
Well, Justice Corporation, he might not be...
Yeah, well, and it's charity. He's in a lot of deep water for, apparently, it's untoward to start a charity and then give the money to yourself. But it seems that, yeah, some people frown on that. And in fact, it's actually kind of illegal. And apparently it's not that hard to get away with until you become president of the United States and you get under this kind of magnifying glass and everybody kind of takes a closer look because you won't reveal any of your taxes or financial information. So he might be in some hot water. We'll have to wait and see. The House passed legislation to create a commission to investigate the insurrection of January 6th. 35 House Republicans surprisingly broke ranks Wednesday evening to support legislation that would establish an independent commission to investigate the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. The bill, which passed the House 252 to 175, now moves to the Senate, where it is considered dead on arrival. Let me ask you, Rob, do you think, is this a smart move? I mean, a commission, hearings, this really smells a lot like Russiagate. And I'm not sure it's really a good idea for Democrats. It might rally some people in their base, but I don't know that the distraction helps the Biden administration at all. What do you think?
I don't know that it helps the Biden administration, but I think that what happened on January 6th, I think we should look at it and see what was behind it.
But aren't we doing that already? Like through the FBI and through all of the law enforcement efforts, the people who've been arrested. Does the theater of doing it on Capitol Hill add anything to that?
The theater is one thing. I'm talking about transparency. Are we ever going to know about that? What really happened?
On a local level, we did find out that one of the, and this has been very sparsely reported, I should add. We did find out that one of the heiresses of the Publix dynasty actually paid for a good portion of the January 6th activities.
I did not hear that.
Yeah, they're doing a really good job. Apparently, Publix buys a lot of advertising in the state of Florida, and I don't even think they needed to ask anyone to be quiet about that. So it's kind of just been mumbled out there in some national news reports, but the Florida media has been notoriously quiet about that.
See, so with transparency, I'd love to find out what she paid for.
She paid for apparently a lot of groups' travel and then some of the logistical support for some of the events that happened that day.
Okay.
So a lot of just promoting getting people there. And it does seem like most of the coordination was done somewhat out in the open, mostly through Facebook. Thank you, Mark Zuckerberg. And these groups that were started, these private groups, and just communicating. And then some of it right out in the open in public posts talking about what they were going to do and where they were going to be. I'm all in favor of holding people as accountable as possible. However, what I'm always really, really cynical about is adding any new police powers. And when I start hearing Democrats and Republicans talking about, Patriot Act 2 type stuff. The thing is, look, we've already seen here, Governor Ron DeSantis used it as cover in a red state to say, hey, we're going to pass these anti-protest bills that are going to basically protect the police and really make it harder to protest and disincentivize protesting. I don't like those. And I also don't like the idea of enhancing police powers and going after people that might be protesting, because the reminder is, yeah, great, look at January 6th, but then remember, whatever laws you create, they're not going away.
No, agreed. We have a constitutional right to protest, and it should be protected. That thing with Ron DeSantis gives new meaning to the "don't tread on me," right? It
Yes.
says that if you run someone over,
No, that was in an original draft, and it did not make it into legislation, but that is in the Alabama bill that passed.
so you could run someone over.
You
and
essentially,
you're good to go.
in certain circumstances, and the way that was interpreted, it looked like the murder in Virginia, in Charlottesville, in 2018 would have been excused by the Alabama law had that been in place. So, the way I look at it is we've already got all the tools in the world to arrest someone who commits just about any crime. Once you start enhancing those tools and relating it to protest, I always remind people that, and don't even think just what the Republicans will do, think what the Democrats will do. There has been an anti-dissident thread in this country, really going back to the Red Scare. If you go back, you go all the way back to World War I. So we've had 100 years of this. Hey, shut up and just say that you live in the greatest country on earth and be thankful for whatever shit sandwich we give you today.
Oh, and also be afraid too.
Yes, be very afraid.
There is that red gremlin
be
coming.
Very afraid, and we will keep you safe. But in order to keep you safe, you have to give up your liberty.
Exactly.
So what else we got? Biden is becoming increasing. Oh, one more thing that we should note is that the Republicans seem to be split, or not really split, but even with those 35 people voting in favor of the commission, the thing that the Republican elders are saying, and why it's considered dead on arrival in the Senate, is it completely contradicts their most moving message to their base for the 2022 election, which was the big lie, the Stop the Steal thing. So that's something to consider.
So McCarthy is apparently he could be subpoenaed for a phone call that he had with Trump on that day.
Yes.
And I think that's what they're trying to kind of keep hush-hush. And that's what I mean by transparency. Mm-hmm. You know what? Everybody has a right to protest, and that's fine. But I'd like to know what happened. I'd like to know, was it 500 people that, just decided to do this, or was it coordinated by higher powers that we don't know about? And that's what we have to worry about.
Yeah, and there was whispers about, tours being given the day before by some Republicans. Absolutely. And so forth. And, could it have been theater that got out of hand, where some people thought, oh, this will be a nice little, news snippet?
I watched that day. There were tens of thousands of people that day, and not all of them stormed the Capitol. Now, I'm not saying that the ones that stormed the Capitol are, just they got caught up. You storm our Capitol, you should pay for it. You should absolutely pay for it. But I want to find out what happened and how it was coordinated.
Biden increasingly impatient with Netanyahu, sources say. From CNN, President Joe Biden has become increasingly impatient with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu following a blunt phone call Wednesday in which the U.S. president set a deadline for violence to ease between Israel and Hamas. The call, in which Biden made clear he expected a ceasefire soon, was more, quote, direct, frank, and candid than any other previous conversations between them. There has been a noticeable change in Israeli posture, really going back to the Obama administration, in which they're kind of throwing a middle finger up and saying, we don't really care what America thinks.
I was just going to say that really did a lot, that phone call, didn't it?
Right? Yeah.
What was it, 300 more missiles yesterday?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, you have the missile sale. The sale of precision-guided weapons was approved by the Biden administration before the latest outbreak of violence between Hamas and the Israeli government. Independent Senator Bernard Sanders is introducing a resolution. Actually, he's introducing today, so when you guys hear it, it'll be done yesterday, disapproving of the U.S. sale of $735 million in precision-guided weapons to Israel. And not a good look for us as
it's a lopsided fight.
Yeah, as the way it's turning out.
It's a giant, again, you know what? Israel does have the right to defend itself, but it doesn't have the right to an onslaught of high technology weapons against someone that's, again, missiles are missiles, right? The Palestinians are launching deadly weapons on the Israeli people, and that's, I don't know if I could curse, but that's really messed up.
Oh, you can curse all you want, man.
Yeah, it's really fucked up that they're doing that. But by the same token, look at the casualties on either side. The Palestinians are getting clobbered.
Yeah, and you have this weird, we could do a whole episode on the origins of this, but you have this weird thing in which you have the PLA controlling the Gaza Strip. You have then, you look at a map of the territory and how much it's just pockmarked with Palestinian controlled provinces within larger Israeli ones. It is not, a defined border. And then you have this terrorist group that doesn't represent most of the Palestinians.
I was just going to say that.
The same way in which Netanyahu doesn't represent a lot of the Israelis.
You know what? On either side, there's families that sit down to eat together, and they just don't want hand grenades lobbed at them.
You have these two obstinate groups on the far fringes who are deathly sworn against each other.
Wait, which country are we talking about? Oh, okay.
So yeah, right. And they seem to be negotiating amongst themselves on behalf of a lot of people that they don't really speak for. And, I've said this before, and I don't know that there was ever any way in which post-World War I, when this began with the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and then post-World War II, when it really came into place, where you say, hey, we're going to take this population of people and we're going to return them to this one place and create a state amid this other population of people that's very, very different. And, oh, by the way, they all consider a bunch of this dirt around it to be sacred and theirs. And that's going to turn out great. So it seems doomed from the start. And I think that if anything,
what did you think of Trump moving the
Jerusalem? Recognizing Jerusalem as the capital. Just a thumb in the eye, just a way to, liberals hate this, so let's go ahead and do it. And maybe they'll help me a little bit in the vote. But what you're doing is you're just throwing gasoline.
I'm surprised we didn't see any repercussions from it. I really am. Like, if I were a betting guy, and I probably said it back then, I would have been like, we're going to pay for that.
Yeah. Not a great look. And you look at it, I don't know that we'll ever see anything that even remotely resembles peace, because the truth is, I think as long as we consider dirt in the ground to be sacred and the sacred ownership of certain peoples, we're in for trouble. It's just, it's one of those things.
Unless your God could really beat up my God.
Right? That's what it'll come down to. So according to them, it'll all be rectified in the end of days. Meantime, expect a lot more dead women and children. Global warming. The International Energy Agency recommends world leaders immediately halve new fossil fuel projects in order to contain global temperature increases. The world basically is answering, so what? So
we live in Florida. It's hot.
Right? This is going to be that thing that if we ever really have to explain our idiocy to future generations, it's going to be, hey, the smartest people in the world were telling you guys for decades that you had to stop doing this and save the planet, and you didn't. Why was that?
Because Exxon needed to sit on the last barrel for the highest dollar.
That's definitely part of it. But let's look at, when I come back to liberals on it, I always say, look, you can vilify the companies and the corporations. That's easy. But are we willing to transition our society in a meaningful way? Because if we don't, just vilifying oil companies and so forth, that's not going to fix anything.
We need leadership. We absolutely need leadership. Will the average American give up the Ford F? I'm just using that because Biden was there yesterday.
Right.
Will they give up their F-150 and an 8-cylinder? I don't know. For the good of the world,
we haven't even moved in that direction,
right? But we've been told for 20 years,
and
minimum.
you see, like certain vehicles. I have a Prius, I love it, but certain vehicles have come out that are promising. But at the end of the day, fleet averages haven't changed very much. So you look at that and you say, we've had the technology now for a long time,
and not just us though.
No, but
it's India, look at China.
Well, they all drive more fuel efficient fleet averages than we do. We're the lowest in the world. Yeah.
Okay.
So if you take the whole portfolio of every car on the road here, our average mile per gallon is way worse than anywhere in the world. And when you look and you say, we've had this technology, not just, let's, long before electric cars, let's look at, when I was a senior in high school, there was a car called the Geo Metro. Remember that?
Yep.
3-cylinder car that I think General Motors made in partnership with Suzuki. And it got 59 miles per gallon highway. Now, it wasn't great on hills, was not a power vehicle by any means. But when you look at that and you say 59 miles per gallon, and it worked. It for the vast majority of uses, it was perfectly fine.
Utilitarian.
Yes, very much so. Now, yes, if you have to tow something, if you live in a really mountainous area, even though I lived in the Appalachians and knew people that drove them,
or if you're a soccer mom,
right. There are certain things where it's not as easy to do. That said, let's think if we would have said, "Wow, but look how promising this is," and then if all of the emphasis in R&D and all of the carrots and sticks in regulation and the tax code were set up to say, "Let's build from here." Right? But I did an article that was, the last year they made that car was 90 something. I did an article 20 years later, and the highest non-hybrid, combustion engine car in General Motors portfolio was a Chevy Spark that got 35 miles per gallon highway. So from 59 to 35, we went so far backwards over those 20 years. That tells you everything you need to know. It's like we could have taken the Geo Metro and kept, developing that concept to a greater degree.
Absolutely.
But we didn't. And then you watch the documentary "Who Killed the Electric Car" to look at the EV movement.
I was going to say the Evo was.
The EV movement through the 90s, where the car companies were like, "Yeah, that'd be great, but we don't want to because we." And it all comes down, Rob, to the same thing. And again, we could yell at the companies. It all comes down to money and convenience.
Yeah, absolutely, but. Look at the money that Exxon makes. Forget GM because GM had their troubles, but look at the money that Ford makes on the. So, all right. So that I lean left anyway, right? Mm-hmm. So I was watching the Rachel Maddow show. She says that Ford makes as much money on the F-150 alone, and they make more models than the F-150, obviously, than Coca-Cola makes in a year.
Wow, that's a staggering. Analysis of
it's like four. I think I don't remember the amount, but it's like $40 billion on that model alone.
And it's they launched the electric version this week, which is promising.
Ballsy, very ballsy, because again, the companies don't. If it works, don't fuck it up. But yeah, so hopefully, and it's possible that maybe that could be a game changer. I don't know, but. Getting back to global warming, we need to do more for sure. And it's not just the companies, it's leadership and it's us. It's us, we consume. We're a culture of just over the top consumption. We don't need everything that we have right now. We really don't. We're just
it's going to take a transformational, like a cultural change of values and what we see as being important. And there's going to need to be, we're in this very me-oriented time in American culture, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Maybe the most so ever. And when you look at it and you say, we're going to need less of that, and we're going to need the opposite of a collectivism where we say, hey, we somehow got to make it socially positive to promote the idea of having less and living more sustainably, rather than right now, social cachet is the more you consume, the better. You look at celebrity culture, it's all about consumption.
That's a problem.
Keeping up with the Kardashians, right. It's all about how much you got, what are you flexing with, what kind of cars you driving, what kind of clothes, and it's all disposable culture, which...
Absolutely. You have a child. I have a child. That's what we have to think about. And you know what? America's always talking about the future. What are we going to leave the future? Well, let's leave them, air.
Yeah. That'd be nice. We talk about, that's one of the data points I always hit with the people on the right. We talk about often the idea that, don't saddle future generations with debt. And it's like, look, at the end of the day, debt, as destructive as it can be, is numbers on a computer screen.
Did you ever see that? There's a YouTube video about wiping out the entire debt and how little that would actually do if we started all over.
Well, first of all, you can go into a whole subsection of economics on that. Debt is a good thing in economic growth. You have to have debt because all new money revolves around debt. That's why the Austrian School of Economics is absurdity at this point. But when economic growth is debt. So it would actually crash the economy if you paid it all off, and it would cause tremendous inflation. There'd be all kinds of problems that went with going to debt zero, which is one of the reasons why during the Clinton administration, when we came the closest, when in fact the last balanced budget with a surplus was 1999 for 2000,
Yep.
and the economy contracted. Because when you look at it and you say, if the government is taxing more money out of the economy than it's spending into the economy, what is the likely effect? It's not that hard to say, oh, the economy will probably contract. It probably won't grow from those dynamics. So, but at the end of the day, even with a debt crisis, you're still talking about solving a math problem. You're solving a problem of digits on a screen.
Correct.
You know what I mean? Whereas I'd always rather face future generations with that than I would an existential climate problem.
My God, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like to infinity.
Like a meteor hitting?
Yes, right? So it's to me, if we're going to be concerned about future generations, echoing your point, that should be the one place that we look. All right, the main subject we're going to talk about today, which I think is getting more attention but deserves a lot more, is the lab leak theory. And again, we're talking COVID-19. Wuhan Institute of Virology was doing gain-of-function research on coronaviruses in bats. There is growing evidence that the COVID-19 virus was a result of an escape lab leak from that gain-of-function research. And I'll tell you, man, from something in the media, this is one of those things where you see institutional narratives and how powerful they can be. And I remember I did a lot of reporting on the COVID-19 crisis. I did series of weekly updates, compiling, the best available information. And I'd run into constantly in the first few months of the outbreak in particular, an echo of the scientific community saying, hey, this was not a lab leak. That's not true at all. This is definitely from nature. And that consensus then was re-reported throughout, every publication in the world for the most part, saying, hey, consensus of scientists saying that lab leak theory, no-go, much more likely to have come from nature. There was a lot of things that were counterintuitive about that. Like, Brett Weinstein, one of the scientists who was first to call this into question and was kind of canceled for it, he and his wife, who's also a scientist, they basically said, look, if you just look at it from Occam's razor and you say, we know that the virus started in this little tiny pinpoint on the map in Wuhan, China. We also know in this little tiny pinpoint on this big giant map that was also one of two places in the world where they were doing research on gain-of-function theory in coronaviruses. It would be, in their words, startling to find out that it wasn't a lab leak. It would seem almost like Powerball chances that it just happened to not only escape in nature, occur naturally in nature, but occur naturally in nature in the same pinpoint in the map where you're studying it, and then have all these statistically unlikely things occur to it. The number one that Weinstein pointing out, that its evolution seemed to be missing certain key things that would happen in nature that would indicate that they may have been supplied to. So let's talk about what gain-of-function theory is. Gain-of-function studies. That is when you take, and again, this gets down to what as journalists we call dueling eggheads, which is when there are people who know infinitely more about this than we do that disagree. And that becomes problematic because when you're sitting in a room of people who've spent their whole life studying something that you only have the very basic, most cursory, understanding of, and you say, here's what we think, and then somebody else with just that much says, well, I disagree completely, you're in a tough position.
So here's and we should find out where it came from. Obviously, it was a worldwide catastrophic event that caused a lot of death. I would love to find out where it came from. But you want to talk about bullshit narratives? The left and the right. They politicized it so much. Will we ever know? Right? Because I'm going to be honest. When everybody on Fox News was saying, it was in a lab in Wuhan, we got to get them. I was listening to the left going, it's fucking evolution, you know? And I was fed one line of bullshit, and someone else on the other side was fed another line of bullshit. Somewhere in the middle is probably what happened. Was it, then you could draw like tendons, tentacles off of it, because was it a mistake? Did it get out by mistake? Was it a military strike? What was it? You know what I mean? If it was a military strike, what do we do? What's the proper response from the world, from the United States? What is it? So it was just so fucking politicized.
Yeah. So so gain of function theory is, again, when you take these viruses that are occurring in nature, and then in a lab setting, so you essentially escalate what would be the normal amount of gain of function that would happen from the different diverging strains that would happen from a natural evolution of a virus, and you accelerate it like times infinity. So you're essentially just continuously provoking it to adapt, and then, observing this until you get it to do what you want. And what the thing that it wanted was, or what they were studying was, what if this particular coronavirus developed in nature the ability to jump to humans? So let's do this in a petri dish with lung tissue or whatever. And then once we get it to there, let's see if we can determine how to treat it, so that if that ever happens in nature, we've got the treatment already. Now, okay, that's
a very benevolent thought.
It is, but then so the controversy, so what I've learned is, among scientists, there's a tremendous amount of diverging opinions about whether or not the risks outweigh the benefits, where a lot of scientists say, hey, listen, you shouldn't mess with it that way, because if you give it something that it may never get in nature, we don't know, or it might take 100 years, or it might take 1,000, it might never happen, and you guarantee it happens, but you say, oh, but we're going to have it in this lab. Now you have something that has the possibility of escaping. We find out that things escape from, again, in this research, that it's not that uncommon for viruses to escape from labs accidentally. So a lot of scientists are like, look, because we
Didn't you see the movie with Dustin Hoffman?
Right, Outbreak. We can't guarantee this isn't going to get out. So if we can't guarantee it's not going to get out, what's really the chance? What's the greater chance here? That we're going to create a super virus that we haven't solved yet? And this one, if this was the case, is a great example of, okay, here we are. We've got one that's now caused trillions of dollars worth of damage and death and everything throughout the world, and we still didn't gain a therapeutical treatment for it anyway. So, and that was one of the things that Weinstein had commented on, was that the other leap that's inexplicable is that what you will often have is they will, when a mutation occurs, then it can sometimes pass to humans through another animal. Now, some other scary news that just came out is that scientists, I'm trying to think what country it is. I want to say maybe it was somewhere in the Far East. It was just reported today on NPR that there was another coronavirus, a novel one, that has been discovered and has the ability to jump from dogs to humans.
Wonderful.
Okay. Now, and problematic because this one tends to cause pneumonia in children. So here's what's good about it is that when a virus, and this is something I just learned studying this, when a virus develops a mutation that allows it to jump from one species to another, okay, that happens once in a while, somewhat uncommon in terms of how many viruses there are and so forth, but it almost then never, another really, really important and unlikely event has to happen, which is most of those viruses, including this one that jumps from dogs to humans, cannot jump from human to human. So that's a different mutation that it has to develop that is unlikely and often doesn't happen. So what Weinstein had said was, here you have a virus that developed the ability to jump from an animal to humans and then was instantly transferable from human to human. That seems almost impossible.
So I didn't know those two factors.
Me neither. So learning that was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. So his thing was the statistical probability that you would have those mutations so close to each other that we'd have a virus we'd never seen, then shows up in bats, then shows up in humans and is instantly transmitting above human or among humans. Those double ones suggest gain of function more than anything else. That rapidity in which it gained that is something that you usually get in a lab. So the problem here, and this gets into a whole tangled web of different parts. You have, former CDC director Robert Redfield has opined that he thinks it was a lab leak. He is being slammed in the academic community. Now we get the Fauci part, which is uncomfortable. There was a very awkward exchange between Senator Rand Paul and Fauci a little over a week ago on Congress, where he was asking him about gain of function. He was asking specifically about certain gain of function studies that were being done. And it's coming out that Dr. Fauci was the chief proponent of gain of function theory in the U.S. of providing funding for that. And the U.S. government provided funding for gain of function research at the Wuhan Institute of Technology.
We had people there.
Yeah. And this was shut down in the Obama administration because scientists said, no, this is too dangerous. And the Wuhan Institute of Technology was cited for lax safety protocols. So there are people saying, hey, wait a minute, this is getting out of hand. We're not going to fund this anymore. And now it's coming out in 2017, National Institute of Health and National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases funneled dollars to gain of function research in Wuhan under the Trump administration by quietly reopening a loophole that allowed them to redefine what gain of function study research was, and then saying, well, this isn't really gain of function, and giving some money for it. So, there was part, let's go back to your point that, when March of 2020, when rumblings of this started happening, yes, President Trump, who is open to a lot of criticisms in his response to the virus, latched onto this quickly because it was, oh, wait a minute, not my fault. Look, it was created in a lab, has nothing to do with me.
Given what you said, doesn't it make sense that we were talking about China maybe having manufactured this? We might have had a hand in it too.
Oh, absolutely.
And
absolutely.
And doesn't it make sense now, with all this on the table, if I were a government that had my hand in that, whether it's China, India, the United States, it doesn't matter. If I were a government that had my hand in that, I'd certainly want to put out, it came from bats. Don't look here.
Right. Or just I don't know that Trump's was that deep. I think his was more as long as it's not my fault, I don't care who it is. And then the other part you have to look at is there's also a multi-billion-dollar industry in the gain of function. Lots of money passing hands. Now, I don't think, I don't buy into the Fauci being this evil genius type thing where he was somehow trying to seed or start this, which you see in some fringe conspiracy theorists. What I'm looking at, though, is you have a guy who is among a camp, which I said from all indications is somewhat split in the scientific community, but he is a big-time believer that it is worth the risk to do gain-of-function studies in a laboratory setting. And someone who disagreed with the shutdown or the prohibition that came up on gain-of-function funding and took steps to help circumvent that prohibition. So you have somebody that seemed to be a little bit, I don't know if obsessive is the right word, but certainly very much in the camp the gain-of-function study was worthwhile and maybe was, leaning on the scales a little bit to make sure that it was getting done and still believes in it. And I guess the real point now, when you look and you say, well, what good would it do now? And, look at the international relations, look at the racial crimes that could come from it. But my question would be, what's most important right now would seem to be a very honest national and hopefully international conversation of, should we be doing this kind of research or not? That seems to be why it's so critical. Because again, it wouldn't be China's fault if it got out of the Wuhan lab. It would be the scientific communities, to include almost all the Western powers that had a hand in this. I think there's enough blame to go around. And I think that the outcome would be, okay, maybe we shouldn't do this anymore.
While you're talking about this, I'm thinking to myself, imagine weaponizing not a virus like we just got, but imagine weaponizing like, I don't know, anthrax, ricin,
Sure.
so that it does this. Imagine what we could do to a population.
Well, and that becomes then the next, part of that question. If you look through world history and governments, tendency to look at everything as a potential weapon, that's another reason why I think even if with the best of intentions, people are in laboratory settings studying this for the right reasons, you could very unwittingly create something that then the people who've given you that funding look at it and say, oh, that's interesting. What can we maybe do with that?
Exactly.
And that's the part that I think for all of those reasons, personally, after doing a few weeks of research on this, my current opinion as a non-expert is I'm very uncomfortable with the idea of gain of function study, and I think I would be much more comfortable if we as a society decided we're going to roll the dice on we'll deal with viruses as they present themselves in nature, but we are not going to play God in terms of amping them up.
And okay, so devil's advocate, right? Because I'm also thinking this. So the United States does it. Does China come along and say we're not going to do it? Does
Obviously,
Russia come along and say,
obviously
we're not
that's the whole nuclear argument, right? Of well, if we don't know anybody else is doing it, we want to make sure we have it because we have the best intentions. And that's when you have to get down to multinational pacts and treaties, and then inspections, and you have to have
then I'm all for
agencies. Yeah, you'd have to have very stringent inspection policies and information sharing at that point.
Yeah, I'm all for it then.
All right, let's go into our final segment for today, and this is, as listeners of Punk Rock Politics know, one of my all-time favorite subjects, and to add a little bit of levity to it, if anybody was watching 60 Minutes Sunday night, we've got some interesting news from the UFO front. So we had Commander David Fravor and, for the first time, Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich, who were training on the USS Nimitz carrier strike group when an unidentified aerial craft encounter occurred over the Pacific Ocean. Dietrich, a former FA-18F pilot, had never before spoken publicly on what he saw that day. And this, of course, is that famous Tic Tac footage that was, Commander David Faber has talked extensively about this, and it was a Tic Tac shaped aerial vehicle that maneuvered in a very unconventional way and eventually went straight down into the water and was able to, break the water surface without any knowing or obvious damage at that point, and maneuver in a way that would suggest a technology we're not familiar with. And
I saw a headline about this. Is this the one that he said, we see objects like this every day?
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the thing, and this is the thing we've talked about quite a bit on this show, is there is no question, going back to New York Times article in 2017, in which the government for the first time acknowledged some of these things that they'd for a long time just said no comment. There's obviously been a slow drip of news coming from the deep state, if you will, on UFOs. And one, theory on it is if you were not able to keep this secret. I've always been a person that said, no, the government shouldn't tell us everything they know about UFOs because the vast majority of people in the country and the world are dumb and hyper reactive, and who knows what kind of lunacy it might set off were we to just say, yeah, there's a bunch of people flying around here. We don't know where they come from. We have very few answers and no idea of their intent, and go about your day normally.
Nothing to see here.
Yes. So I was never in favor of that. And, one of the things that I've thought of the idea of the shift has been if you were a government with that mindset, however, whether it's increased sightings or activity or the fact that the strangest thing that's happened in the last 20 years that we never predicted the outcome of is just about every human being on the planet walks around all day with a super high-tech video recording device in their pocket and a GPS locator and all kinds of other stuff. That's crazy. Like think about, I tell my son all the time, there's nothing that if we really look back 20 years ago, that would have surprised us more if somebody gave us a glimpse of the future than what the hell's in this thing that we put in our pocket.
Star Trek knew it.
Not even though, if you think about it, they didn't have video on it. That was a weak walkie-talkie.
Tricorder.
Yeah, but I mean, when you look at the communicator, it was a weak walkie-talkie, right? And it was basically a flip phone, with a speaker on it. Yes, it was a razor. It was a razor. But when you look at that, you say, we've got a brand new iPhone has more tech than a laptop from 5 years ago. Oh my God, yeah. Right? So you say we have a high-tech computer that we couldn't even conceive of 20 years ago being in a computer is now in a phone. It's weird to even call it a phone because it's not like
it's a device.
Yes, because how often do you actually use the phone? That's probably the least common thing you do with it is the phone technology. But you have this computer, camera, video recorder, audio recorder thing in your pocket. Now it's not just a bunch of people saying, I saw something. Now increasingly it's, no, I saw something and explain to me what I recorded.
Well, so I don't remember what the statistics were, but we are one marble in a giant network of millions and billions of other marbles floating around in space. Is it possible that anybody could really think that we are the only life form?
And if we weren't, that there's no chance that other people just wouldn't be ahead of us in terms of their evolution.
Even if they were just a little bit behind, right? Mm-hmm. We had the technology now for decades to...
And look at this. Look at the idea of how exponentially our own tech has changed in the 20 years like we talked. So you seem to get to a point. So let's just look at like our technology. You seem to get to a point where it becomes exponential, meaning that, you start with, simple things like the wheel, you get into things like the steam engine, electricity, and then all of a sudden, you're talking about computers that are a block long, and then you scale things in terms of speed and size to a point where it just ramps up exponentially. And that's what it seems to me has happened since around the year 2000. So if you look at 2000, cell phones, I didn't have a cell phone yet in 2000. Dial-up was still the dominant form of computers, so very unimpressive. This is a good reminder that I give myself sometimes in terms of how much that's changed. When September 11th, 2001 occurred, the word iPod hadn't been invented yet. Think about that. There wasn't an iPod yet on September 11th. Which seems relatively recent in terms of everything else. Like when you think of September 11th, you don't think of like it being a low-tech time, a long time ago. No. You think of it being similar today, and then you remind somebody, no, we didn't even have an iPod yet, let alone an iPhone. And then you think since then what we have now, and how silly the tech even from 2010 seems now when you look at a 2010 computer or a 2010 phone, and then say, what will it look like 50 years from now?
Or... getting back to the marble in space, right? Depending on where we are in that time continuum in series to the Big Bang, right? So the Big Bang throws off a bunch of rocks. Imagine if there was a rock that had life that was one of the first rocks out there. Yeah. How exponentially much further they are.
Let's say if they were just 300 years past this point, and again, we're conceding that you go on a slow ramp and then all of a sudden it's like compound interest. Just being 300 years ahead of us would seem exponential to us.
Oh my God, yeah.
You know what I mean? Whereas there's a chance that they're 1,000,000 years ahead of us, 1,000 years ahead of us. It's hard for us to conceive of those time things. But when we look at these crafts, what seems interesting about them is their propulsion system is definitely something that if it's known tech on Earth, that's not well established. So when people say, well, we got to find out if it's one of our enemies, I have a real hard time believing that China or Russia has been able to keep something like that secret.
And that we're not on their tail, right?
Yeah.
We have really, let's not take away credit from our research and development. We've got some really good research and development.
Yeah, we're in almost every way at the top of it.
Yeah.
So the idea that they would be that far ahead of us secretly and not having in any way use that against us to change the, international dynamics seems far-fetched. But when you look and you say that you have this system that seems like most of them would be moving on what we call anti-gravity. So some sort of force in which instead of everything we know about propulsion, basically we do something in which we create some sort of explosion and it blows things out the back to move something forward. That's the way we got to the moon. That's the way we continue to put things, everything from your car in motion, in most cases, to rockets and everything in between. These devices seem to be working in some way in which they push back against gravity, which would require some sort of propulsion and likely a fuel that we don't know about. That takes you into a really neat story, which is, in my opinion, one of the, if not the, most interesting alien tech type stories that's out there, which is the Bob Lazar story. Bob Lazar, of course, is the guy that worked at Los Alamos Labs at Area 51. There was a great effort by the state, for lack of a better word, to discredit him ever having worked there, though it's since been proven. And Bob Lazar claims that one of the things he worked on while he was there was taking alien technology, what he called Element 115, which seemed to have anti-gravitational properties, and trying to reverse engineer wreckage from a craft that had been found. And again, not understanding where it came from, but seemed to be non-human origin. And this has been widely discredited until Element 115 is now been shown to be able to be created in the lab for seconds, that they're able to keep it stable. And that's one of the more interesting ones, because it would seem to lend credibility to the idea of some of the things that Faber and some of the other military people had observed in terms of anti-gravity. And then, of course, there's also the Travis Walton story, the inexplicable Fire in the Sky book and movie about the six-day abduction, is another fascinating one to look at. But there's definitely something going on with this slow drip. And so the part of me that says, is this the way you'd prepare a population if you think we can't keep this under wraps much longer?
I've been saying that for a long time. I think it is,
Now, the cynical part of me then hedges against that and says, or if you're the preeminent superpower in the world and you love spending $1 trillion on the military every year, but you'd like to spend $2 trillion, would there be a better way to build up public enthusiasm for such Space Force type technology as saying, hey, there's a bunch of crazy shit happening that we can't explain, and we need to build some better tech?
Yeah, be afraid of the red boogeyman and the guy from outer space. Be afraid of him too.
Well, there's increasing evidence that we're not afraid of the red boogeyman anymore. And so many Americans, and we saw this really in some of the populist draw to Trump, was there's a big appetite to say, yeah, we don't want to spend $1 trillion anymore. We don't want to fight a nation build and, throw American lives, blood, and treasure at things that never work out well.
My point was, we need your money. Let's keep you afraid of something.
Yes, that's the thing. Yeah. So increasingly, as we're not afraid of the red scare, wouldn't it make sense to call it the green scare, right?
Totally.
So the jury is still out, but I find this fascinating, and I'm going to continue to watch with a bated breath to see what happens next.
Me too.
All right, Rob, thanks for joining us today. And listen, is there any place where we can see the Jukebox Assassins coming up? I know that COVID's just starting to open up.
Actually, believe it or not, so we were talking about theaters earlier. Nothing on that front, but we're playing Sunday on Anna Maria Island.
Excellent. Right here in our backyard.
Yeah.
And where will that be at?
That'll be at Island Time.
Oh, excellent venue, too.
Yeah. So we'll be there.
What time is the gig?
7 to 10, I think.
7 p.m. at Island Time on Anna Maria Island. Go see Rob and the Jukebox Assassins. Is there a website or a Facebook page that people can get the regular schedule?
Jukebox Assassins Facebook page, and you can visit me at my website and give me your email, and I'll send you my newsletter, which is really cool. You get a different rock star's recipe every month, whether it's John Bon Jovi's lasagna or Keith Richards' shepherd pie. There's a little bit of music trivia every month, and you'll get my schedule. So go to rgsoloact.com and give me your email address. That'd be great. We'll stay friends.
Excellent. Thanks again for joining us. Tune in every Friday, and don't forget to go to our YouTube channel, Punk Rock Politics with an X, and punkrockpolitics.com.